Thank you. Thanks for joining us. This is the Aspen City Council work session for September 19, 2022. Somebody might have volume already. We have two items on our agenda this evening. The first is our childcare goal update, and the second is a continuation of an item that council had been talking about. It's okay. Which is the short-term rental roll-off topic, if you will. Anyway, we're going to get started with our first item, which is childcare capacity and City Council's critical goal of childcare in our valley.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here this afternoon. I'm Shirley Ritter, Director of Kids First, and I have Nancy Nichols and Megan Monahan with me, and I know that the word has gotten around, but I would like to let the public know that they are going to be the new co-managers leadership at Kids First. So congratulations. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Board member here, and we might have one or two more. Mimi Howenstein is here from the Kids First Advisory Board. So we will get started. There we go. So just a little bit of update about what this critical goal has been about for increasing childcare capacity. The 5 components of that, which then relate to the activities that are involved. And there are distinct long-range activities as part of this goal, and also some short-term wins. We're focused on both. So that includes the planning and design for Burlingame, childcare workforce, and workforce housing. It also includes policy and operational and other planning for what is still 2 years out. In the short term, we're focused on supporting the early childhood workforce, and that's what we're here to share with you this afternoon. So we have some policy questions coming your way, and this slide really just outlines what those policy questions are, and we'll come back to these, but it's good to be thinking about those a little bit. So one of the things that we were asked to come back and address is the Burlingame design schematic, and then a pause potentially, or where we are with that. The second one is modifying the goal with more of a focus on early childhood workforce recruitment and retention. That leads us into number 3, which is the direction that we received about possibly changing the sales tax split, and at what level City Council would like to see that allocation changed. Number 4 is whether City Council is supportive of eliminating rent charges at the Yellow Brick, still charging for utilities and trash recycling in order for programs to reallocate that money into staff wages and benefits and supports. And then the last one has to do with the potential for acquiring housing for early childhood educators. So those are the directions that we're seeking. So overall, we just wanted to take a couple minutes and brief you a little bit on where we are in terms of capacity, physical capacity. So the RFP is still open on the available classrooms in the Yellow Brick building. And we think that actually our proposal for 2023 might create some more interest and invigorate that a little bit, because the concerns have been staffing those rooms. There are people that are interested, but hard to commit without knowing that they've got staff. We also have seen movement on the CMC Infant Center. We are updating the IGA so that it aligns with the lease, and on the verge of getting that signed and moving forward with infant care in that space. As we mentioned, the Burlingame discussion, that is moving on. They are working on the schematic design, and I believe that is slated for a December 5th work session. with council to come back to you with that design. Just briefly, Snowmass Village received their feasibility report. It does indicate that there is a need for additional classrooms, specifically infants, but the question for that council is what can be built, what should be built, what can they afford, and looking to the future. So they have some next steps for that plan as well. Basalt is moving forward with the design on Willits Parcel 2E. Blue Lake is the operator that is working on that plan and will be that operator for that childcare portion. And then Stotts Mill, which is really the developer looking at that operation. They have not picked an operator yet, and I think that might have been a typo in the memo, and I apologize for that. But they are pouring the foundation and moving forward on that. So they are also looking for someone to operate, and I believe that building, excuse me, is about 4,000 square feet. And they will, the plans that I've seen originally also had housing, two two-bedroom units on a second floor. So that was encouraging.
You had a question?
Yeah, a couple questions.
First slide.
Yeah, the first.
All right.
I can ask him later.
No, go ahead.
No. I just wondering the facility that you mentioned that's being built in Basalt. Do we know how many people that's intended to serve, and do we have any sense of whether any of their parents are working up here? I know they probably haven't had the list yet, but if you could guesstimate,
You know, based on what the programs in that area tell us, particularly around their wait list information, Growing Years, which is in Basalt and also in Pitkin County, has 200 people on their wait list.
Okay.
The Stotts Mills building will have, I think, 3, maybe 4 classrooms in that square footage. So it depends on the ages that that provider serves, but that could be anywhere from 30 to maybe 60 children a day. The Parcel 2E has the potential to be bigger than that, and I haven't seen recent plans to see just how much, because it's more an affordability issue than it is a space issue in that case too, and fundraising for that project. So at one point there were, I believe, 5 or 6 classrooms, but I haven't seen final plans yet for that. So it would care for a fair number of children.
Yeah.
What happens, I am told, in the Basalt, Blue Lake area is that they do get a lot of people that live down valley, work up valley, and they cross paths a lot. So I don't know off the top of my head how many of those families live up here. You know, in the past when we've surveyed, we know that maybe 50%, maybe a little bit less, prefer to have children where they live. The majority prefer to have, especially younger children, closer to where they work. But that's still a lot of children in that area. And what we don't know just yet, because we have the other project going on with our online waitlist system, is how many of those are duplicated with the programs that have waitlists up here. Because it could be some of them, but I don't think that people specifically that want a spot in Wildwood, for instance, are on the wait list at Growing Years. Could be, but probably not a lot.
Yeah.
So,
got it.
sorry, I don't have a better answer
No, that's
for
great.
you
I mean, it
tonight,
gives me,
Steve.
no, I mean, it's an appreciable number that we can expect will be served, but, not a
Right.
tremendous one, and that's important to know. And then second question, can you just remind me, the CMC infant room, how many total infants are we thinking that will be?
Say that again?
The CMC infant room, once it's.
How many children?
Children, how many total infants?
8?
It's one room with
One
8
room,
infants a
just
day.
one, okay.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's it.
All right. There we go. So the first, the question about the sales tax allocation, I wanted to give you a little bit of information, and this was provided by the Finance Department, so I appreciate all those calculations. You can see the current allocation on the far left and the split between affordable housing and childcare. This was based on 2021 collections, and then the percentages in that next column. So then moving across, it goes up to a 40-60 and then 25-75, on up to 20-80, and 5% 95% split, and the dollar amounts that flow with that. On this
Rachel?
note,
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I can see a quizzical look on Skippy's face. I think while you were in Chamonix and we had the childcare work session, our board discussed, should we change the ratio, because it's not set in the original ballot language, and it has been changed before. It was one time 50-50. And we were looking at the need and the issues, and we told staff, yes, we'd like to look at changing the ratio so we can produce more childcare need. And so just in case you're wondering why that's coming up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there are two recommendations. The city staff recommendation is for the 75-25% allocation split. And the reasoning for that is largely because affordable housing is obviously another one of the council critical goals. The Kids First Advisory Board recommendation, oh, good timing, is for a higher split, 95 to 100% of the allocation. And that reasoning is that housing has income revenue from the RET, which is very high right now, and potentially, if the short-term rental tax passes, from that tax as well. And the fact that this would still be providing housing for childcare staff. So it still begins to meet that goal. If you would like more information at this point, or if you want questions, Mimi and Stefan are both here from the Kids First Advisory Board to address that.
Any questions at this time? I'll wait. I was meeting with Diane today and talking about, these are large policy change questions that you're putting in front of us. And I would look at this a little bit deeper on the numbers about where money is going and impact. But it ties into another item that is coming up on your list of 5 questions. So I'll wait a little bit. I just wanted to share at the outset that, I look at this and I'm like, this is a long meeting topic. Or there's several meeting topics in here that make for a long meeting. So I'll hold any comments here, but for me, this graph just begs a lot of questions. So we'll come back to it as we go through more of our
Okay.
questions.
Okay. So at this time, and probably going to some of your questions, we have some high-level decisions and recommendations from the Kids First Advisory Board and from staff as to how we would support staff and why that's important. And so the biggest ticket item here is a wage enhancement funding that would really be awarded to individual childcare staff in order to, number one, increase their wages, but really make that then so that housing is more affordable in the community or near the community where they work. The numbers that we put together were estimated at $500 per month per FTE. And that also included a decrease over the out years with increasing tuition by the childcare programs, providing that funding. As the city contribution goes down, the tuition contribution from the programs would go up to maintain that level of wages and benefits to childcare staff. So part of the reason that this was the top of that recommendation was that it benefits a great number of people in the near term. We all debated between purchasing housing, building housing, that sort of thing. and came to the realization that, that would help a few people in the shorter term. It still is something that we're committed to doing long-term, but people really need staff, and the staff really need help now. So this was the most direct way, I guess, to support that. It also comes about because we are already looking at changes in the financial aid calculator that we currently use. We, much like APSHA and pretty much everybody else in the community, we've come to realize that it was a small slice of the community and getting smaller that we were helping, because CCAP, maximum income for families, has gone up, which is a good thing. They're helping more people. But our cap so our maximum income has not gone up recently, and we're looking at raising that. Also, the recommendations that we're seeing now at the national level are as low as 7% that families should be paying for childcare. And in this community, families are paying much
Way
more than that.
more.
Some are paying 30%.
Or more.
Yeah, I know, keep going.
50%.
So we really wanted to be able to support families with financial aid, and at the same time, if we're asking programs over a period of years to increase their tuition, we really need to increase that financial aid help to families, for those families that really can't afford that increase in tuition.
So I guess Rachel has a couple questions, but I would start just by saying, I see an estimated, in our memo, I see an estimated allocation of $600,000. Just wondering, who qualifies for that? Where does that supplemental budget come from? And things like that.
Good questions.
Like it's,
So the intention would be a supplemental to the budget for 2023, and that would rely on a larger allocation from the sales tax. That's where that money would come from. The other part of your question, who would qualify? Anybody who is working in Pitkin County Childcare licensed program would qualify if they're full-time. We talked about a prorated amount for somebody who works, for instance, less than 30 hours a week, part-time.
in Aspen, in the Yellow Brick, in Pitkin County.
Intention was Pitkin County because we have we have over half of the children cared for outside of the city limits of Aspen. Woody Creek, Snowmass Village, even up to Pass at Wildwood, as well as Growing Years and Basalt. And all of those things, yes, that's outside of the city limits of Aspen, but it takes the pressure off the programs in Aspen. The more children that find care someplace, the fewer children are on the wait lists every place. And we have, for the most part, financial aid families, the requirement is that they live or work in the urban growth boundary. And over the years, I would say there is more and more of an increase in families who both live and work in the urban growth boundary.
As opposed to,
Pardon me?
you say there's more of,
The
as
other.
opposed to
There are
what?
more because of the affordable housing and Burlingame specifically. So we are seeing more, and there's always some. I think out of the current families, honestly, maybe 25% don't live in Aspen, but they work in Aspen. And the other ones are actually both living and working in Aspen. So I can't tell you much more because I haven't dug that much into financial aid for this work session to give you a lot more details. But I think that's the answer that you're looking for right now.
And then, I mean, that for me would beg the question about county participation, and I don't know their funding, and I don't know how they're, I assume that they have some state allocated funds that they do something with in the early childhood
They are the ones that administer CCAP for the low-income working families, for sure. And like I said, that has gone up. I mean, I think really it was in the past 2 years, it went up from 185 to 270
270% of
of
poverty.
poverty level, which is a pretty big increase. And so that has taken a good number of people off of our financial aid. It really merits us looking, and that's going to be the next Kids First Advisory Board meeting, is looking at how much should we raise our financial aid? What do families need? And what percentage can we go down to help them be affordable?
And I'm also talking about the wage enhancement proposal that you're coming to us with right now. Does the county share in this, and how do they share in this? So, again, these beg a lot of questions.
It's a great question, and we have been in conversation. You guys know Ashley. You know that she's working for the county, and childcare is one of her deals.
I literally didn't know you were behind her until that moment.
Would you like her to add comment to that?
No.
No, I'm just glad to see your hand. I had no idea you were sitting there. You were like completely
Sorry.
in the eclipse.
So Ashley is working on childcare. She's been in a lot of communication with Shirley, and we'll be making some proposals that her board has asked her to come to specifically on childcare. It's just that we're a little bit ahead of where they're at right now. Also, just in the policy question about wage enhancement, council could say, for example, that if you may want to exclude teachers who, early childhood educators who work for another taxing district, because their salary is a whole lot different than kind of your average of around $20 an hour that we're seeing for starting wage in the other programs. And so they have the taxing funds to be able to do that themselves. So they may not need to, the school district may not need to be part of this. That would be some council direction.
Definitely a question we still have.
Just the school district?
Yeah, there aren't others that are supported by a taxing district at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to make the comment I kind of make all the time, is we know the cost of the child care to most of the families is subsidized, but we don't charge the full rate. We don't say what the actual cost of providing this service is on a break-even basis, and those families that don't qualify for aid pay the full cost. I mean, it's wrong when we're looking at changing the ratio to continue to say we're going to subsidize people who may or may not even need childcare for the day or who can fully afford it. And it's taking away from what we can provide for those who need more. But if the true cost of providing that childcare for that day is $160, that should be the rack rate that everybody sees, and then they get subsidized down from that. But it's just unfair to say, oh, it's only $80 a day, and it's not. It's not $80 a day because of the rest of the subsidy, and we're starting to talk about free rent here. So I think it's important that the actual cost of providing the service is known to the parents, even if it's subsidized down from there, and that it's charged to people who do not qualify for the financial aid. And I'm willing to look at raising those financial aid limits in the future, but that's just got to happen. It's just not fair to not have it happen.
I just would weigh in and just second that very strongly. I think that's correct. I think it's the thing to do to communicate with integrity what's really going on, and it's a recognition of a very wide disparity of income in our community, and like awesome for people in all parts of that, but that's reality. So I totally agree, and I think it's if a rate raise triggers, a negative initial reaction, it's a very easy explanation. And like Rachel said, if that, the aid is there for people who need it. So it's sort of irrelevant to that user group.
Good point.
Thank you.
Good point.
Just setting that benchmark, I think, is really important.
Yeah, it's the accurate cost. I mean,
what it really
as
is.
painful it is for all of us, we have to say how much it costs to subsidize each unit and what we're selling it for to somebody.
Right.
And this is what it really costs you. And this is what we need to do with our other services. Thank you.
Because these are for-profit and nonprofit private entities, I do think that the city could come out and say, hey, we do want you to acknowledge your full cost. I think it would be really difficult for us to go to them and say, you have to charge this, and as a quid pro quo for getting additional benefits.
No, they could choose to subsidize families, but then aren't we subsidizing that choice? If it's a for-profit center, that changes the dynamic dramatically, versus the nonprofit center. So maybe there needs to be two sets of rules there. But if we're saying that we're subsidizing with free rent, we're subsidizing with educational opportunities for their teacher, we're looking for housing for their students, and they're a for-profit business, but they want us to subsidize their clients who are making $300,000 a year, I can't go there.
Well, and I think what we know about the programs is none of them are making giant profits.
Yeah, I know they're not
She
making
means their
giant profits.
parents.
I'm talking
I
about
understand that. No, I understand that.
But I'm just saying, if we're not subsidizing if we're not subsidizing them through a tuition subsidy, but we are still subsidizing them through general program support, I'd like some acknowledgement of that. I mean, it's just
to ask a question in service of that goal to whomever is appropriate, I would see a potential positive for the nonprofit organization as providing some cover as to raising their rates, right? The downside could be that because of that rate raise, even though someone could afford it, they leave. And so now they lose the sort of profit center, potentially. I'm just like catastrophizing the worst case. And I don't know if that is the case, but that's something to consider. And I wonder if there's an opportunity to check in on that so we're not missing a downside unintentionally.
Well, you're right, because wealthier families have more resources and choices. I think that's always been the theory of subsidizing programs at any level, and financial aid for sure, is that if you're not wealthy and you have to work and you have to have housing, you don't have a choice.
right.
So, yeah, I hear that too, and I've thought about that.
Yeah, maybe that's an illusion that we get. That's not going to happen at the first question, but it is worth checking in before
Exactly.
we make a policy decision that unintentionally we look back and say, oh, look what happened is everyone got a nanny, now there's no profit center, and now they're having more trouble paying their staff,
I also think, and it's kind of to Diane's point, the first step could be calculating and knowing what your full cost is. You don't have to charge that right out of the gate, but you can put that on the bill and then say, because we do fundraising, because we get this help from Kids First, we're only charging you this much. And you're right, that does provide a little bit of cover then for when they need to raise that. So there's a few steps that could be implemented there. That leads us directly into the next bullet, which is director supports. We put some money in here in a couple of different areas. And the first one is to have the folks that did the employer workshop that I was a part of from EPIC, they have a financial model that is interactive. So people can put in what they charge, how many kids they have, how much they pay, and they can begin to see that real cost. And they can adjust things and go, oh, so what if I paid my staff more? How much more would I have to charge? And that sort of thing. So I have been working with those folks and gave them sort of a scope of what we'd like to have that training include, and they're going to get back to us. I suggested that we had initial money in this year's budget in order to have them do that first training, because all of the childcare programs are working on their next year's budget. And it needs to tie into what that budget looks like for them. We're also working with a consultant that works with nonprofit EDs, particularly around leadership issues, priority management, project management, staffing, all of those things that largely childcare directors don't come into that job having an HR background or a finance background or some of those things. So it can be tough to be a new director and wear a lot of different hats. And I think that director support with some of these changes that we're asking of them, I think that's going to be really critical.
How many directors are you talking about?
You know, we have, I believe,
Once again, I guess
14
we're talking
licensed
county,
programs. Yeah, in
countywide,
Picken
you're going to
County.
offer
Realistically, I think we would have 6 to 8 who would participate in this. So it's not a big number.
And have you checked in with them? Have you talked to them about this at all? This, to me, on first glance, seems like one of those issues that in a year from now, we're going to hear from 6 to 8 directors that are like, oh, now Kids First wants to tell me how to run my business.
Exactly. So we have, and we actually had a directors meeting. We have learned that lesson too. We had a directors meeting on Friday. We went over this presentation. We didn't get a lot of feedback because we also understand that, you know, it's not real until council gives us direction to move ahead and figure this out and see what works here. We will continue, and by we, I mean all of us, to meet with directors. And I kind of see that it might be a larger group meeting, which is what we did on Friday. It also probably will be one-on-one meetings because you get different thoughts and different questions and answers when you meet that way. It could also be a quick survey sort of turnaround if it's something specific in a proposal that we're coming up with. So yes, they definitely need to be part of this change all along. So the next item on our bulleted list is the yellow brick rent. We already subsidize that building, as you know, with the rent. Our expenses there are, I believe, about 10 to 11% higher than the revenue that we get in just for maintenance. On top of that, we subsidize any capital improvements in that building. It is a city asset. This change would free up that money, the savings that programs in that building would have in order to help support staff. And honestly, whether that looked like increased wages and benefits, whether it looked like, oh, I'm able to hire a float teacher so that I can give my other teachers some flexible time off, you know, those kinds of things. That would be up to the programs. Again, they're the ones that know better what their teachers need and what would really be helpful.
Yeah, Rachel has a question for you.
You bet.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the capital reserve section of that need for the yellow brick. Is that an annual appropriation that's set aside and builds up over time for when we need to re-roof it? Or is that something that comes in as a one big hit, boy, we need to replace the roof, and then might cause challenges with the allocations on other funds?
It is part of our long-range plan, the capital improvements there. Most recently, I mean, we've seen sewer, we've seen flooring, the roof was taken care of, the boiler. So it is often a one-time expenditure out of our budget, but it is part of 10-year, Pete, longer than that for the long-range plan when we talk about capital expenses. Yellow brick capital. And
Yeah.
it's budgeted out at 10 years. Yeah.
Again, I guess what I'm wondering is if it's a 10-year plan for capital and some years are big, some years are low, do we do an annual appropriation into a savings account for when those larger capital needs come up?
We haven't at this time. It's been,
You might want to come up to a microphone.
Sorry about that, Pete.
You got stuck in the spider web, Pete.
it's all good.
He doesn't look
So
like a fly.
we have a sufficient fund balance at this time. So
Right.
we are basically being able to cash flow those types of projects when they come up in the 10-year plan. Depending on how much we would commit to future obligations, obviously that could change that planning process. And we'd have to either consider timing or financing at that point.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just want that to be calculated in as part of the yellow brick rent support issue. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think for any of these things, we're going to want to see how they translate into impact later. You know, again, whether it's the other floater teacher or they can show us the wage increases or things like that. You know, I was just going to mention that, you know, at City Market, they've already told the workers that there's going to be a incentive pay for the winter starting in November. And I'm not sure whether it's another $2 an hour or $3 an hour, but, that on a 40-hour week comes out just about to the $500 a month that you guys are talking about here. And that's just simply so they can keep people, just so they can keep them through Christmas,
And that's the competition in this town.
Yeah, it is. Well, when you drive through Wendy's in Glenwood and see the $19 an hour starting wage at Wendy's in Glenwood, that's what we're all competing against.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
Frosties.
Thanks, Rachel.
Like a Frosty.
The other items on here include our hope to be able to hire 2 additional early childhood teacher interns. We had success with the first one in terms of education and experience subbing in the classrooms. She was hired immediately by one of the local programs. The only downside to this is that we have the same barriers as everybody else hiring additional staff. We have that position open right now. So I would like to include that, and I would like to fill those positions, but that's a question in all of our minds. So, and then the final one is to be able to use some of the allocation from the sales tax to purchase, or from our reserve funding, actually, reserves to purchase childcare staff housing in order to, little by little at least, be able to house staff into the future and have that available as an option. As we think about that, there are a few more things that have come up in the conversation that we could use the same direction on, and that includes offering capital grants to the early childhood programs if they have an opportunity to expand or renovate a space and it benefits their program. But it would definitely be about expanding capacity. The waitlist online platform, and I think Stacy is listening on Zoom but is not able to be here, that is moving along. The Early Childhood Council signed the contract, and we are included as part of the council in terms of benefiting from that. We will be able to have the waitlist information by unique child, but we will also have programs will be able to put their openings. So if all of a sudden, they've got openings, but they're only on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they can put that into this online platform, and a family can go in and go, oh, well, I've been on the wait list, but I'll take those 2 days. And it really benefits the programs because they're able to fill spaces that much faster. And anytime you've got spaces filled, you're generating more revenue. So it's good for them. It's good for families because they can see it more quickly, and it alleviates many, many, many phone calls and emails back and forth. So we're looking at a 6-week to about a 2-month timeframe on that, and I think that's really exciting because we've been talking about this for a long time.
That 6 to 2 is up and running, like fully functional?
Yeah.
I should get this
because
microphone closer.
It's a platform that other counties, other regions are using. The state will be using it to roll out how they administer the universal pre-K in about a year from now, actually probably before that. But it'll be part of that same system, which is also a benefit because it'll talk across all those systems.
It's great.
Yeah, I know. Long time coming. So we'll get back to you when that actually is up and running and you can go in there and sort of test it. We'll get an information memo to you so you can check that out. We also have instituted a hiring bonus for new childcare staff. We started that in August with existing budget. We would like to continue that moving forward. We've had three applications for that incentive for newly hired people. So that's, I think, a positive sign. And then last but not least, we are working in partnership with the county and with Aspen Family Connections to put up a freestanding parent resource hub. We had a planning grant, and that was primarily to hear from families. We did interviews, we did focus groups and surveys, and what we heard was people that got information the long way around, but they didn't know all of the different resources. And pretty much across the board, it's like one place where I can go and find out about childcare, about health visits and vaccinations, about mental health, about social events, recreation, all the things that I might need to know when I all of a sudden have this baby or this toddler or preschooler, and I'm really searching for activities and things that are going to benefit my family. And we have allocated from this year's budget $5,000 towards that startup. We also are applying for a state implementation grant that followed the planning grant. So that actually could eliminate most of that cost for the first year. And so that's pretty exciting to be able to work together to put that up for families.
Don't forget the VIP.
Oh, sorry, I skipped right over that. So you heard about the VIP awards before, thank you. And we are running those through again. We've changed points, allowing people to earn more points, allowing people to earn a higher award, and that will go out, the application will go out December 1st, and be paid out also in early December. That's a really quick turnaround in order to get that end of the year bonus awards to existing childcare staff. So, in the first 6-month period, I believe we paid $38,000 to about 40 staff members. So we're hoping for more staff members and probably a bigger payout. But it's budgeted this year, so we're good. All right. So now we get to the conversation that you all need to have and the policy direction for us to be able to move forward. And anybody else that you want to hear from.
Thanks. I guess the first question I have for you, if I put together the two charts that you supplied us with, one being the proposed programs and the funding available or opportunities, and the sales tax calculation chart, if we want to do all this, then we would be looking at option number 4, a 95-5 split. Because
Correct.
the total of the list that you just shared with us down there is around 1.8 or so.
Which includes the acquisition of housing. That is correct.
Right. Okay. All right.
Wait, can you say that part again?
It includes that portion that would be used to acquire housing for childcare staff.
So that list, which includes that 1 to 1.5,
there.
Right.
only works out there.
So they, other than who's using the housing, the actual difference in transfer is more like 300,000 in that scenario, because of that 1.8, 1.5 is going to housing anyways.
Sort of. You know, part of the policy question that we all have to be considerate of here is about spending housing dollars for specific housing and prioritized housing. So while, yes, you can say it's for housing, and yes, but it is not for general housing. So,
Mayor, are you talking option 4 in the split?
yes?
You wouldn't necessarily have to go there because there are funds that are part of, I'm not going to get the wording right, the reserve.
Well,
Kids
there
first.
are reserve funds currently
funds.
in the Kids First Reserve.
Right, we'd probably use some of the reserve funds for the housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rachel, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm comfortable using housing daycare funds for housing daycare workers. I don't find that to be the same prioritization as if we were taking it out of the RET funds or any other housing mitigation dollar type program. This was passed for housing and daycare. I don't want to go as high as that sort of number of a 90-10, but you know, I'm concerned that without this sort of support, this program's going to fall apart. You know, we're not able to hire teachers. We need more capacity. There's a lot of people who are not rejoining the workforce because they have childcare needs and they have to stay at home. It's a responsibility that the city did take on. I certainly wish there were other partners helping to pay for this. And part of our discussion, at least before, was, if you change the ratio by $600,000 or $1 million, that is one housing unit a year. That's not going to happen, but it's only one housing unit a year compared to the child care program falling apart. And given the incredible shortfall in both of the programs, I don't want to keep shorting child care so that we have one more unit a year. We know we need public-private partners to be able to complete the lumberyard to go forward. We know we're still talking about prioritizing the housing that does come online for sale for people just who work within the city municipal limits, because we no longer have really active partners on production of new housing. But I just don't think we can pretend that the childcare situation is okay without changing this ratio. And I'd love to see us have miracle solutions, but the one thing that really strikes me out of this whole kind of potential is there's nothing left allocated towards construction bond for new facilities, should we need that, if we're not able to finance any new facilities strictly through grants and things like that. So I think it's important not to fund or allocate all the way up with these enhancement programs, because we're probably going to need that in the future. But I am very comfortable with the staff recommendation of moving this to a 75-25, and then dialing back the programs perhaps that you've been brainstorming to fit within those to say what would be the most effective going forward.
Thank you.
Let's go through these questions.
Okay. So the first one takes us back to the work session about the Burlingame Early Childhood Center, getting that to schematic, which is the contract that we currently have with the design team, and aiming for December and a December 5th work session, and then pausing the project until we get direction at that point in time from council.
Yep.
I just have a question about this. So when we talked about it at the last meeting, Ward brought up sort of the question of need. Do we need it? And I guess I share that question. I felt like I knew sort of incontrovertibly we did have this need, and then we had the stuff going at the Yellow Brick, and what I observed for me was just a ton of people saying we're never going to find a spot, and then everyone finding a spot. I know that we still all know that we have a big infant need, and that's outside of the scope of that, and these rooms can be used for whomever. But it did put some doubt into that need question for me. So I guess my question is just, if we're talking about December, but we're going to have this wait list thing up in 6 to 10 weeks, what would be the harm in waiting to see what those numbers look like?
Well, I think we'd be breaking our contract to bring it all the way to schematic, and then we'd have to restart with a new firm should we be restarting the child care project.
Explain that to me. There's like an end date that if we don't move past that, then the contract is null and void? What is that?
No,
We just
Skippy,
approved a contract.
I think you're asking the question of why make the decision to pause now?
No, I was asking why, if we're asking this question now, then why wouldn't we wait to say yes until we've seen those numbers from the wait list, is the question I'm asking.
Because we want to start to move forward on some of this work. That's why. And so the work will continue to go forward to 100% schematic. It would just be that we could start on these other pieces now.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, at least for me, part of this has got to be that there is federal infrastructure money now, and there's federal Inflation Reduction Act dollars now.
Sure.
And if we pause it saying, let's see if there's really that need later, which I firmly believe the need is there. I don't know why there's continual doubt over that when we hear about it all the time. We hear it from the parents. We hear it from the wait list. Do I expect Basalt to solve our problem for us, or maybe Snowmass Village to build more capacity up there for their employees and it's going to solve our problem for us? No, it's not. And I just can't see. This question is just weirded funny because we have the contract to continue the schematic. It's more about, should we then pause the project after that? It would be helpful to know what would the next steps be if we're not pausing it, and what does that entail?
And I think that is the intention for the December 5th work session, is to identify the next steps and the costs associated with that. I don't know that for sure.
Well, then we don't have to make the decision to pause until then.
Yeah, and we'll have those numbers by then anyways. Sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, we will have cost estimates, and I think there's still several decisions to be made at that point before the construction phase, which has to do with size and cost and need, all of those things. So to me, this was more about getting confirmation on the conversation at the last work session about how we move forward and when we hit that pause.
Yeah, the last work session was clear direction to move to 100%, so,
Okay.
yeah.
So there are two reasons that we're asking the question now. The first one is if council said move forward, we don't necessarily believe we could fill that facility with
Qualified
teachers,
programs.
right? It's such a challenge at this stage. The second reason is that we would use some of that money to fund some of these other programs. And if the decision waits till December, then at that point, it'll just be a later implementation of some of these programs, right? Because the funding would come from, depending on the council decision, but if council were to concur with staff's recommendation, it would come from a combination of the childcare housing tax distribution change and that fund, that reserve. Thanks.
I gotcha.
And I asked this council, we've been planning for a part of the parcel out at the lumberyard to be utilized for a childcare facility. So my secondary question to this was, should we turn some attention and resources to starting to design that facility, just get some preliminary work done that maybe, not waiting for lumberyard housing to be going on, but look for that as a location for the next potential for increased actual physical capacity. We also have the issue of, and there's a way around it, but Burlingame homeowners of signing off on the housing part of what we would like to do at Burlingame. Now, we could just do 2 units, and I believe that's already approved.
Yeah.
So we have a default kind of solution to that, but anyway, I just throw that out there because I think that the lumberyard location at the ABC is probably a better location than Burlingame. But construction and timing over there is, a whole nother ball of wax. But anyway, in answer to number 1,
Yes.
yes, we've already said we're going to 100% schematic, and
So,
yes,
we'd like
we're
a
not
pause.
hurrying towards completing that at this time.
Yeah. Looking forward to more information at that time.
Okay.
Number 2.
All right, number 2. So this is modifying, which it doesn't really change the overall critical goal, but it puts more focus on the staff recruitment and retention, which is item 2 for now, as compared to the physical project build. So that, of course, then leads us into the next questions, but we sort of wanted to start with that to see if that's where council agrees to head.
Let me just ask, relating back to question number 1, if we're at 100% schematic and then we pause the project, no more staff time or work on it, so if grants were available for construction or capital, we would just be letting them slide by? I mean, that's what I'm wondering is how long, I guess maybe in December you decide how long a pause or what sort of thing, but we're also making the choice now to pause it. And I mean, I just wouldn't want to miss cycles like that. And
Sure.
I almost started choking when you started talking about designing at the lumberyard, and then we'll have 2 design projects, but neither one, and people will be competing over which one they think is all better. And I mean, if I'd known that, I don't know why we started on Burlingame schematic as opposed to lumberyard schematic before now, because it's just, you know, to hear that you have one plan and another potential plan just sitting on the shelves with no construction, that's not satisfying. And I'm happy to change this goal, but I think I don't want to see the capacity really falling off the edge of the cliff, because once you have enough teachers for the rooms we have now, then it's going to be back to the question of where do you get the new rooms and more teachers. So I just can't see it falling off the cliff. But otherwise, modifying it to try to get more teachers now and fill the rooms we already have now, absolutely.
Just, Rachel, to sort of respond to what you're saying, I think that the notion of being ready to act on a limited opportunity financially for something that may be very needed and maybe, I mean, it will be transitory, but maybe just, you know, a one-time opportunity. I don't want to miss that, right? I think I just feel like I had a lot more certainty about what was happening in the childcare space a year ago than I do today, and I just genuinely feel sort of uninformed about the state of the state on this. And so when I say pause, it's more just like I feel like I need to get caught up to make appropriate decisions. But no, I don't want to watch the pitch fly by, and that information is helpful to me, so I would want staff to keep an eye on that stuff.
Criticism of council at all. I'm just saying these are money-related things. And once we agree to number 2, the pause on number 1 might become a lot more permanent.
Yeah, I'm not.
We've just taken the funding source away to even begin a bonding question or a local match question. We're starting to spend it on other areas.
I don't feel any criticism towards me or council at all. I'm just saying, to make these big decisions, I'm just saying personally, and I think maybe others as well, but I'll let them speak for themselves, need to get caught up. But I do not want staff to ignore opportunities, because if staff showed up during that pause and said, hey, we can get 3/4 of this thing paid for, that would very quickly get my attention and change how I'm thinking about it. So I'm not, when I'm asking for a pause, I'm not suggesting that we don't look at those potential financial opportunities.
Does that make sense? A pause, but a pause still keeping an eye out for those opportunities that are in maybe a limited window.
For me, the point of a pause is just to sort of get caught up on the actual situation and what the needs are. They're not intended to keep our eye off of these other related opportunities that could very much influence the direction of a project.
So it wouldn't be a total pause, it would be just looking for funding opportunities in that stretch.
Sure, and the reason I'm hesitating is I'm not as familiar with the new legislation and how much that really potential would be to fund new childcare. We didn't have much success earlier this year with our local congressional delegation, so I'm.
Yeah.
I do think getting through the schematic phase puts us in a better position to access some of that funding, because the main reason that we were not funded for the employer-based childcare through that project was because we couldn't complete the project in the time that they had the funding for. So I do understand, and I think, to me, that's what that pause says. It's like it's a pause, but it's still keeping our eyes open for funding, knowing that we need a little bit more information about need and about availability of resources. So I think it puts us in a better spot, actually, to access some of that funding, closer to that goal line. And we still have a really good plan. I will say, we've had this conversation for a lot of years, and there were some good reasons, primarily because of the abundance of employee housing at Burlingame, that site was chosen and that was the preferred site. So I wouldn't rule out lumberyard, but I I still think getting through schematic is a good investment in the site at Burlingame as well.
I do too. And as this has evolved over the last couple of years is really where I sit now. You know, I've said plenty of times in meetings that I think that the lumberyard location actually is a better location, mostly because of Harmony Road and the access to Burlingame facility. But my biggest concern right now is building something that we're not going to be able to staff.
Yeah.
I mean, we're really, this is, and situation has changed. And Rich, I think you heard what Skippy said earlier, but you know, what we've seen is, and this is a great question. Miss Katie, how many classrooms did she operate? 1, 2, or 3?
3.
3. So Miss Katie just stopped her operation. 3 classrooms of kids have been absorbed into some system at this point. As a matter of fact, the reports that I've gotten back are that all of her clients and attendees and students have found a spot.
That's what I've heard as well, but I just don't know. That's just what I've heard.
And not being as close to this as others in the room are, that definitely signals to me like, well, wait a minute, where are we with this?
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think we need those 3 classrooms back. And I don't think we want to lose any more. But it does give you a pause, and it was Ward at our last.
I'm okay with the pause. We
Yeah.
keep talking about it. I just.
No, not that pause. I'm talking a pause to just think about it. And again, Ward recently came to our meeting with that kind of a change in his perception of this as well and stuff. And I was just like, I don't know. Anyway, I agree that we should be getting the Burlingame done to schematic. At the presentation at our last meeting, it was $150,000 to finalize those plans to that degree. So I'm all on board. As far as the pause goes, I'd say rename it, and looking for funding opportunities is more what we're looking for. Question number 2 here. Yes, I think we definitely should be focusing on staffing and what the future looks for this, because there is the potential that and it goes back to some of the questions that I have about some of the other proposals that we're seeing here. For example, the $500 per FTE per month, does that make a difference? Does that solve somebody's housing bridge gap? I don't know. I really don't know. Is the sheer availability of housing the real question here? So again, as I started this meeting off by saying, this is a lot. And it begs other questions about where we're going. If everything we see here today is a yes, and it puts us in a great position for the future, then I'm all for it. But I don't know that these actions actually do that. I don't know if they get the result that we're hoping for here, because I don't have some of the information.
Can I turn that into a question?
You know, the only thing I can say before we go into all the questions and look for more information is we have had staff and a board looking at this for months, and they've given us their recommendations with the information they have. And if we need a more thorough memo to back up the recommendations they've already given us, then that's one thing to ask. But I don't know how many times we hear from other departments and they tell us this is the real deal and these are our recommendations, and we start pulling back and saying, well, I need more information, I need more of this, I need more of that. I want to know, what more do we really need that didn't come from the professionals we've hired to manage this for us?
Yeah, so I was actually going to just turn that into a question, which is, can you give us a little bit more narrative around this goal? Sort of, I'm hearing similar things in conversations I'm having, but, sort of how did we arrive at that? What are the information sources, and how do we think these proposed solutions at this budget will meet that problem where we see it?
Good question, because we did a survey of early childhood staff, and we heard some of both. We heard people that just really needed help paying for it because the prices have gone so high so fast. There were some people that really struggled finding housing, but actually not that many. I think the bigger question that I think about is how we're going to measure the impact, because that's really the only way we're going to know, is this enough? Is this the right program? Is it the right dollar amount? And I think we have to be really intentional about how we ask those questions and the answers that we get back, because it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
I get that. I really do. I do think from what we've heard from people that it's enough. There was a time, and we had this conversation with the Kids First Advisory Board, where we started out higher because we wanted to make sure it was enough. So I think there's some room there, and I do think that we've got partnerships going on with the county that are going to help support some of that, but some of that is just unknown until we try it and we figure out what are the measurements? How are we going to measure this when we come back to you and say, we reduced the overall turnover, or we increased the recruitment, or whatever other matrix that we come up with that really does point to not only what we're doing making a difference, but overall improvement in the child care system, because there's a lot of other factors at play too. So
I want to just ask you, so you've had some conversations with some directors. Have you asked everybody? Have we done a questionnaire?
well,
I don't want to get into an extrapolated survey or anything, but have we done a questionnaire? Have we asked? And again, we're talking about not just Yellow Brick here, and we're not even just talking about City of Aspen, we're talking about countywide.
right. So the short answer is, we just had the meeting on Friday with the early childhood directors and rolled this out to them, because we have thought about this and we put a lot of work into this, but it wasn't, we haven't talked to you guys yet. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to be going to the directors really with, well, what about this? And would that be enough and all of that? I think that's our next step. I think we've got a little bit of time between some direction that we get from you all tonight and what questions you have that need to be answered. We come back on October 18th for our budget work session. I would expect a lot more information, a lot more details about these programs and this funding to be part of that budget presentation.
Just to add to what Shirley said, there have been numerous conversations that Shirley and her team have had with the early childhood educators, just looking at the utilization of Kids First provide substitute teachers at $20, $15 an hour? $15 an hour, and the number of substitutes used. We've heard from providers for multiple years now about their inability to hire staff and who they're losing staff to. So the question about what's the problem, and there has been specific feedback. We know what they generally make for starting wages, and I think you know even more than starting wages.
Yeah, we do a survey every year that we don't have back yet because we do it in the fall. And we know a lot of things have changed since last year, and that's why we do the survey and we talk to the directors. The starting wage a year ago was about $20 an hour. No, I take that back, not starting, the average wage for teachers. In conversations, most programs have either increased wages overall, or they've given bonuses and incentives because they just weren't sure about operating and making that commitment going forward. So it's more than that.
So what Shirley's talking about is, so the problem is known, and it's that combination of wages. And in this arena, right, when SKICO went to $20 an hour and everyone else followed, and we know now that people don't, there's no job that's under $25 pretty much for starting wage, this is one of the few exceptions, and we know the housing piece is critical. Those are known, and the other piece that Shirley's talking about is the implementation details. So we did need to come to council first and talk to you all about, are you okay with this? And then go back to the programs and talk about some of the implementation, right? What is that going to look like, kind of where the rubber meets the road?
Yeah. Maybe one of the unknowns that I'm struggling with here is in community resources. So the conversation that we're just having right now is talking about locally competitive wages, and that it has attracted otherwise early childhood educators to other professions. But what I don't know is, do we even have that resource in our community, or are we really talking about needing professionals in this workforce from other places? Truly, to Rachel's point, and I think this is, Rachel's largest point here, is that not just wage, but actual housing that is available, that is attainable, that is affordable. And so one of the unknowns that I don't know is it wage competition in our local area, or is it a greater problem than that? And so for example, let's say we match starting wages. Does that have the impact of bringing back early childhood educators? I don't know. I don't know if that resource exists in our community, because again, we're talking about maybe it's from here to Glenwood, or we're talking about from here to Rifle, whatever it is. I just don't know. Anyway, I don't want to get stuck on this. I want to move through this and keep going through these points, because we're already a little bit behind our schedule.
I know.
Skippy.
And I apologize, but I want to really understand this, and if we're a little late, then I apologize, but this stuff is super important. I want to repeat back what I understood from this exchange, what the process has been and where we're going, and you tell me if I've got this correct. But basically, staff level, Kids First Board has spent a lot of time sort of investigating and looking at the reality. They've come up with some alterations around, where we should be putting our effort, the financial structures to do those, and they've put together a recommendation that you guys have brought to us to get our head nod, yes or no, or alterations. And at that point, that will then be taken back out to the actual care delivering community, as well as, I assume, parents, et cetera, for a check-in. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you for that, and thank you for all the work. I guess I question if that's the right, shouldn't say the right, there is no correct, but I wonder if there's a better way to do that. It strikes me that I know so little about childcare. I know I want to have them one day. Like, that's kind of the end of my expertise. And the people who know the most are the ones who are literally doing it every day, and that includes the parents who experience the outcomes every day. And so, I wonder about a process where the first check-in is with those staffers and with those parents, just to say, what's going on in your world? What do you really need assistance with? Where are the biggest holes? And if we have a goal of having more childcare, how can we help you achieve that? And from that, then getting it filtered up to staff level and board, who can then look at it from the perspective of okay, there's a difference in wants and needs. There are other things that we're not, it's not your job to consider, but we have to consider as administrators and part of a larger organization. And then through that filter, then we get it. Because my concern is, we give you a yes or no up here, you guys go have those meetings, they have great ideas, and the response is oh, but yeah, council doesn't support that, right? And then we get nowhere. And so I think that's my broader concern.
I understand. I share in that. That's what I'm saying, is we're making decisions that are framework for going out to a community check-in, but
I don't have the information yet.
Is this effective? I don't know, and I would hear it from people that are in the profession and the parents. Anyway, we can still get through this.
Being mindful of time, I think, I can give general things, but I think, with the feedback of I really want this to stay fully open-ended as it goes back and come back with that filter, because that will help inform me to the point where at the next meeting, when we're giving direction, I can do that with more certainty and understanding of what's actually going on.
I get you.
Yeah, okay.
I think maybe, sorry. I think maybe we've given the wrong impression. These folks talk to the providers every day. Megan's in the classroom, supporting teachers, coaching a lot, right? So this isn't like we're going to go ask them, what do you need, right? We know they need funding and they need housing, right? There's like no question. I'm
Right.
about that, right? So that check-in, though, about going back is implementation details, right? So we're saying, to get this funding, you need to, we're going to be asking the programs that it's a phase-out over time, right? These are implementation details we're talking about going to check in on. Phase out over time, and to make up for that, they will need to raise their rates. And if we have financial aid programs, then those rate increases won't hit the most vulnerable people, right? So we go and have that conversation, and they say, oh, well, actually, it would work better if you put a little less money into there and a little more money into there. Or we would like to, instead of sending the financial aid to the program, it should go to the just, right? These are implementation details, which is different from a check-in about what do you need. We know what they need.
You know what they need.
Thanks. Okay. Question number 3. Yes, we are looking at supporting a sales tax split change.
Maybe?
To what degree?
Maybe?
I'd like to follow the staff's recommendation and go with the 75-25.
Right.
I'll go along with that as well.
This is this is the first time I've seen this one, and I'm certainly not a hard no. But this is one where I have a lot of questions. I mean, I just think, principally speaking, right, from the 30,000-foot view, without housing, there's no need for childcare in 30 years because there's no one living here, right? And so as a first principle, housing does come first, but we don't get to make decisions in black and white. And I recognize that there's significant support that we may need. So I look at those numbers at 75-25, I don't remember what it was, but it's taken a lot out of the affordable housing pot.
$1 million.
Yeah, that's a lot. But as was demonstrated, some of it's actually kind of going back into the affordable housing bucket in a different way. That actually does sort of mediate some of that concern for me. But then I ask, how are we spending that? And that's the thing too, where like a check-in is helpful. Like, do we want to buy one unit and have that forever? Or could that be spread across, $5,000 a year rent assistance to hundreds of teachers? And would that be a better allocation? Do we want to do it in the county as a buy-down and take advantage of their buy-down program? So we're getting free money not free money, they're sharing in the cost burden from the county, right? That may be a way to leverage those dollars. So as a general principle, I'm okay with considering some split, but I'm a long way from knowing if I'm ready to support a 75-25.
Okay. I'll support 75-25 at this time. I'm willing to start the conversation there. I have, as you can tell from the tone, I have a lot of questions and reservations and concerns. I really do.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we'll start the conversation there.
Well, and it'd be good to know how we can turn those reservations and concerns into forward progress as well.
When I know, I'll let you know.
Sure. I mean, I think a general, like, as Rachel said, just a more comprehensive update of sort of all this. I mean, I don't know, does that speak to you at all?
We've been trying to get our heads around this for years. We stated this as a council goal years ago. Yeah. I think we've taken steps backward over the last couple of years. We're trying to take steps forward now. I don't know that we have all the community information that we want. I don't know if we can get it. So I want to participate in this work session, move these questions forward, and we will have time to digest this and revisit it, and we will have a 5th member of our council back next week. So as we move forward with this, we will have a full board as well. That's where I'm
Would
at
it
right now.
be helpful between now and the October budget work session to have an info-only memo that addresses some of these questions?
Absolutely. A summary and follow-up from this meeting is definitely needed.
Right. And then, and I've been writing down your questions about community. Is this the right amount? Is it housing? Is it access to housing, funding for housing? I don't know that in that short of a period of time, we'll have any better information about wait lists. I mean, we can
But we'll
pull
have that
the-
when it's ready, and that's not that far off. I mean, it's months, not years.
I know.
I mean, but it's, yeah, it's,
Okay,
unfortunately, in this universe, that doesn't feel that slow.
okay. Okay,
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're using our felt sense of information deficit as an opportunity to learn more. We're not supposed to know everything. Otherwise, there'd be no point of
Right.
learning. And there's a great point in learning every day.
I agree.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Number 4.
So this is the question about eliminating rent charges at the Yellow Brick. The charges for utilities, trash recycling are fairly nominal, but it does still create that awareness that they are the ones using those resources, and so they need to be aware of how much they're using and what that cost is. And then, with some planning for them to be able to come back and tell us the money that you saved, how did that benefit your staff, right? That's the intention, and that's about where we are at this point with that.
How does this affect the relationship between caregivers at the Yellow Brick and not at the Yellow Brick? And I don't mean necessarily interpersonally, but like relationally in the marketplace.
It's a little bit all over. We have a couple of programs that do pay rent in the buildings that they are in. Growing Years is one, Woody Creek Kids. But the same operator, for instance, then does not pay rent in Snowmass Village. And Little Red never has paid rent to Snowmass Village. The, Wildwood is in a different situation altogether. They pay rent, but it's a subsidized rent to the Forest Service. So it's always a little bit of all of that. I will say, for the programs that aren't charged rent, they cover more of the maintenance and, indoors, snow removal, outdoors, all of that. So that is a benefit to the Yellow Brick tenants because that is something that's provided to them. As long as I've been around, there is a perception that the city and city policies favor the tenants in the Yellow Brick. And at the same time, the tenants in the Yellow Brick might tell you that the opposite is true. So
Right.
it kind of has to do with a perception more than anything else. And there's usually good reason for, in Snowmass Village, that is at least a quasi-historic building that the town has owned forever and the land it's on. They just want childcare, and they've only got, well, they own one building, they don't own the other building, but they've only got 2 rooms. So it's kind of a different equation.
Yeah, got it.
Rachel?
Yeah, I am in favor of eliminating the rent charges at the Yellow Brick and charging for the utilities so people keep track of their usage and try to save money. At the end of the day, we are lucky. There's a lot of dispersed childcare operators in different parts of the area, but they also could close at any time. It's always been the reality. And the one that we know does go forward is a Yellow Brick. And so to make sure we have operators there and to be able to fill the 3 empty rooms, I'd like to make that as attractive an offer as possible. Thank you.
Thanks.
So are there any parameters and stipulations around this? I don't know who gets what. You're talking about $145,000 a year, is that what I saw?
Right.
$145,000 a year. I don't know who that's spread across as operators. Those savings, are they supposed to pass those on to their wages? And if they're going to do wage increases because they're saving 100, then are we also going to be putting $500 per FTE on top of that?
Yes.
Potentially, yes. It could also be that, like I said, they use that in a different way that supports their staff. Maybe it isn't directly wages. It could be benefits, because benefits are not that great in most programs either in terms of health insurance co-pays or some of those things.
So are there requirements? Are we building in requirements, or are we just going to drop the rent and see what happens? I mean, are we talking about the operators and directors having, do you understand what I'm saying? Like
I do, and
what's going on?
I haven't crossed that bridge yet personally. I think that's a conversation with Jim, because they would still have a lease. There would probably be some requirements about enrollment and using that space in the way it's intended. We would probably have to come back to you with what those requirements would be for sure.
Well, and I mean, just to that end, I mean, I think if we drop it to zero, we better think of that as a forever, unless we're very, very clear about this is a one-year test that we're looking to see if X, X, Y, and Z outcomes happen. We're tracking those and we're looking at results. Because if we're not doing it that way, this is a forever decision. Right. To be clear.
I agree.
And I think you stated earlier that currently we operate at the $145,000 is about 10 or 11% short of operating costs, operating and maintenance perhaps of the yellow brick. So if we're going to see this given back to us for Kids First long-range planning in the budget process.
It's not on.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I think a lot of things that are kind of being discussed tonight are things that need to be hashed out at a future date.
Yeah.
Part of that can be in the budget process. Some of these things is, I think we're seeking direction on high-level policy. Are you supportive of stopping on putting all staff's time towards developing a new childcare facility and instead working on, retaining staff and ensuring that our existing facilities can be staffed and supported, right? That's a policy question on number 2. And like how we get there, which was, do we do $500 more a month for a person or something like that, is a tactical item in that policy decision. So I think I just want to be careful that we're not trying to jump too ahead to the nitty-gritty part of it and get more to.
That's the good stuff. That's great, Pete. I appreciate that. I guess what I would, I would have approached this a little differently. Instead of perhaps asking City Council today to eliminate the rent charges, I would have said a reduction of some type of schedule. Should it be 50%? Should it be 100%? Should it be for 1 year, 3 years, or indefinitely? Those are the questions that I would like to see kind of played out. I don't know what those scenarios look like, but yes, I'm supportive of reducing rents. Should it be eliminated completely, and for how long? I don't know.
So that's good direction. It's you're interested in seeing more of a concept of what that would look like and if there's a duration to it and how much.
Yeah, I can certainly support that, taking that look, but, unless I'm mistaken, it's a little bit of a circular game already in that their revenues for their rent come back into the Kids First Fund, which we then allocate out for childcare subsidies or teachers. I mean, it's not as if it goes into a separate fund. So, the rents that they give us back are the money we spend as it is with other things in the program. I mean, it's just part of the same all one budget,
Well, and the other part of that is if you eliminate the rent part of the equation, but you're trying to charge full price, you've just dropped full price, but you have increased the subsidy. It's a weird leaky bucket we got around here.
I know.
All right. John, any input there?
I think this would be a good case study for an econ class.
Or Parks and Rec episode.
Yeah, I hesitate with complete elimination of the rent charges, so I will support what was discussed up here.
Which is a reduction of,
Just looking at reductions and like, if it was eliminated, how long would that be for? Is there a period when the operators come back and tell us what we've gotten for the money that we
absolutely.
didn't subsidize with?
One note is that, so we did have a lot of discussions around taking it to 0 for infants and toddlers, but leaving it at 50%, right? Multiple proposals, and at the end of the day, this was $154,000 of the whole budget. And where we do have classrooms open and want to move those along, that is part of the reason why we went to 0 and saying, we believe this will move the needle on operators, right? We had one, and that person eventually stepped back. So I'm actually a little bit more concerned about leaving a question open than if council said tonight, I think it would be better for council to say, we're comfortable with, if it's infants and toddlers, go to 0, and for other rooms, go to 50%, and making that decision now versus waiting till October, because anybody who we talk to between now and then would say, well, I have to wait and see what council's going to do because it affects my pro forma.
Understood.
Thanks.
Well, then I think we should I'm just immediately interested in what is the impact to the long-range budget? I guess. And I think what I'm hearing is not much. If you're going to make a change to this tax question and allocate an additional $1 million a year towards the kids' first budget, that $150,000 of that will go towards building maintenance and upkeep because we will not be getting those revenues from here, which means that it's only a $800,000 change to the blah, blah, blah. Anyway, sorry, Diane, I don't think I can answer that with the specificity that you would like tonight. I'm supportive of some reductions. I don't have enough information in front of me to know if it's, to what degree, if there should be parsed out to some classrooms of some. I'm willing to get information back about this.
Okay. Yeah, that certainly is on the list of questions that we can ask. And how much difference it would make, and whether it is enough more of an incentive for the infant toddler care that we'd like to see more of. All of those questions.
Just a kind of a background information question, Shirley, but when the operators, private or for-profit or nonprofit, come in to ask for their grants for program support, you review their full budgets. Are they available to you? I mean, there's no black box of you give us money and we do these
No, their
kids.
financials?
They're full
So-
financials.
Yeah, that was it was a long time ago, a city attorney decision that we could, in fact, provide grant funds to for-profit and not-for-profit as long as they played by the same rules, and that included sharing their
Financials.
their
So
budgets,
you'll
their
be able to
financials.
compare their budget from past years where they had a line item for rent to what not a line item for rent, and be able to
Correct.
see the difference, whether it's teacher count or teacher salaries that come through from this change. I just wanted to be clear that you guys are already seeing the budgets of these organizations as they get their program
For
support.
those programs that request grant funds, yes.
Yeah.
We have not to date asked for financial documents strictly from the folks who are leaseholders in the Yellow Brick, if they don't ask for grants.
If they don't have grants. Well, I think that might be something to kind of institute across the board so you can actually track the benefit of these programs.
Yeah, certainly one way to do that. I think there might be multiple ways, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay? We're coming back with some more feedback and some answers to your questions on the yellow brick. Okay? The last one up, acquisition of housing for early childhood educators. And for the time being, primarily coming out of the Kids First Reserve Fund in order to do that.
Skippy?
I definitely support identifying housing solutions for early childhood educators, but I'd love to see the sort of study and comparative analysis of the best way to deliver that, whether that is acquisition of single units, whether that's acquisition in partnership, whether that's acquisition in effective partnership through the buy-down program or through a housing credits development purchase, or just rent assistance. I don't know what the right solution is for this audience, but I hope I hope we're doing that analysis and really checking in with the teachers themselves as well.
I agree.
Whatever's most effective.
And this, for me, goes back to the question about county-wide. Who's eligible for this? If we're going to be acquiring housing, and I assume we're going to be acquiring it at a pretty slow rate, so you get one housing unit, who gets it?
What lotteries are for?
I mean,
Powerball.
My
Did you?
My gut impression is that we would turn to APSHA and we would look at their processes and lottery system. It's not something that Kids First would have
Yeah.
the expertise to manage.
so then it would be somebody, proximity, depending on where, would we be looking for this unit in the city of Aspen
right.
limits?
Yeah, that still doesn't
UGB,
fully answer.
Countywide?
Right.
Would it go to county, somebody that works in childcare in the county, I mean, a lot of questions around this.
Yeah, particularly, I could be wrong, but I was under the impression that part of the subsidy for the programs relates to how many are workers within Aspen versus not working in Aspen, or if they had people who are working in Eagle County, and it's not subsidized in the same way. But, I really agree with having a much bigger look. I'd like to see this goal go forward, and rather than no specific purchase targets, but maybe no specific purchase plan, but how to go about it. But with the right expertise, I'd love to look at whether there could be a Kids First bond question to be able to say, okay, we have X many, if you had $300,000 a year, you'd put towards paying a bond, the usual ratios times 10, you'd be able to have a $3 million to start to be able to bond. But it's got to be a much bigger look with expertise that doesn't sit with the Kids First board now to say, how could we parlay this into a bigger amount to secure housing for childcare workers? But one unit at a time is pretty slow. So I would be less inclined to say, hey, there's a unit we can buy down for $1 million versus here's how much on an annual basis we could pay towards a bond to create a number of units. And I've said it before, but at a certain time when the next school tax question comes up for the school district, I'd like to make sure they really have already asked the public for all the mills that they're allowed to ask for under property tax, rather than continuing to ask for sales tax, and look at what sales tax can do locally for the needs that the city has. But it's gotten to be pretty dicey in my mind that we're helping to pay for a school system, and yet we're also helping to try to pay for the childcare before they get in the school system, and we don't have enough money to do that. And yet I believe they're allowed to ask for more mills of property tax, and that's the proper way to see it funded. So anyhow, I'm just saying, one-off housing, just like others have said, doesn't really strike me as being valuable. But if there was a way to look at what we could do on a purchase program through a 20 or 30-year bond, then you can start to look at small hotel properties that come on the market, or older things like that would actually have multiple places for people to stay. So that's just my impression of it, but yes, I'd like to see us start supporting housing for early childhood educators.
Is that semi clear?
All right. That was for some good thoughts. Thank you.
Sorry, on the housing piece, so I hear general support, but I hear a need for a specific plan, and I don't hear consensus on council yet as to what is it that Kids First needs to come back with to then act on.
Let me ask Diane, because I got the impression from the memo that to really actually be able to fulfill some of these other goals that might need a little more fleshing out, but the ones that have support, that's going to take most of that the $1 million from a 75-25 split, and that there really isn't anything left to start going out and targeting housing with in a big way. I'm just saying I thought it should still be on the plans and perhaps to take a bigger look at that later. But unless we went to the 100% or the 90-10, I don't think there really was money in that amount to do housing.
I think that was the intention of using some of the reserve. I think the Kids First Board is ready to go out and buy a couple units.
How much of the reserve do they have? I mean, this would have been easier for us, I think,
4
if we
million?
had the budget.
5 million?
coming forward in,
4 to 5.
yeah.
And I think the intention that the board had was, I thought Mimi's here, about going out and buying a couple of units versus creating a bonding plan or creating a program evaluation, right? It was going,
If they have the ability to buy a couple units now and want to, I'm okay with that. I'm just thinking a couple units is going to do nothing in the long term. We've got to think bigger, than 2 units or 4 units or whatever we can get with that money.
Yeah. And do they have specific properties in mind? They're like
No.
ready to make an offer or anything? Yeah, so I hear that, I appreciate that, and that may be the best response, but we're at the top of the market right now, so I don't think it's going to hurt to take a moment to look at it. Other ways to leverage those funds.
No, I wish I did. I wish I had a couple properties in my pocket. but
Totally,
no.
me too. Happy to have one to rent, it's really nice.
So just to clarify, it sounds like don't move forward with spending down fund balance just yet on finding 1 or 2 properties, and instead look for a longer-term potential for a housing plan.
I would think that's accurate.
Okay.
There's questions around that as being the most effective use of this. There is support on this
For housing.
for housing for childhood education. And I got to ask you a question, because Rachel, you often talk against kind of job-attached housing.
I've said again and again, that I'm comfortable with this because the tax was passed as a housing/daycare tax. And if it's the housing that makes the daycare happen from that tax, I'm comfortable with it. But I would not be prioritizing the general RET housing dollars or mitigation dollars towards any specific job type. It's just how I look at it. I understand.
No, not just in that. I was also, it's not just in that. And I understand, I just need to hear from you, but I understand your position. Not just in that, but also just, you've shared concerns before about job attached and okay, so somebody moves in and now they're not working for this person anymore,
I have concerns about
or they're working for that person in conditions that they don't like, but their housing's attached and now they can't leave. So you've just shared concerns about that before, and
Yeah,
Okay.
I've had concerns about that.
and
sorry.
they still exist. It's just I get it.
It's, again, this was passed for those reasons, but if we were to start to say, oh, well, all the RET housing can only go to restaurant workers, or only chefs and servers, but not dishwashers, I don't want to start, prioritizing job types within the greater program.
I get.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I'm in the same. So yes, the answer is yes, but we're not sure that buying 1-2 units right now
Is the optimal.
is the best way. I'll say if we have actually Kids Funds First in the neighborhood of $4 million or so dollars, and we're going to make a change to this tax split, we could actually be at our ability to build either the Burlingame or the lumberyard childcare facilities within a few years. If we budget it correctly, right? Right now, what we're talking about is changing this split and utilizing the additional funds towards changing our goal here. But
But if they weren't spent on that.
if they weren't spent on that, we could be looking at affording to build
Then we're back to the same thing.
Who's going to teach it?
possibly, but we still don't know the answer to that. Like, we don't know if we actually have community resources where that would be staffable. We don't know that. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out is like, hey, we're making some shifts here.
Coach?
But if we take our eye off of the ball too much, then we forego the other opportunity, which we could have in a couple of years.
Scroll back to number 2.
Coach Trecker, you got a halftime speech?
Oh. Sorry.
So I think that comes back to this question too, which is, do we prioritize working on something other than the childcare staffing model and workforce for that industry as kind of the priority? That's what I think this question number
Sure.
2 was.
Yeah.
As opposed to divert
Physical.
money for, $1 million for the next decade, plus the $5 million we have in the bank right now, and say, okay, now we're going to go out and build Burlingame childcare, which probably will actually have a little inflation on it. We might need another
You think
decade.
construction costs will go up in a decade?
So, yeah.
No, I appreciate it. I just want to make sure that we're all clear and speaking the same language and understand.
Swahili. Got it.
Okay, that was question number 5,
It was.
and that was the end of
Yes.
those questions.
Yes.
Thank you.
And the beginning of many more.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, which is a good thing.
Yes.
Good thing. Thank
Ready?
you. Congratulations. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Just to be clear, I think the firm direction we have is, yes, change the sales tax 75-25.
Yes.
Great. Thanks.
What? Yeah. I don't know, man. The budget package that's coming to us might be kind of prickly. I'm serious.
Well, no, the qualifier that
I don't-
order my city email
I don't-
there, so.
Our next item, guys, is a return item to us, and this has to do with the run-out period that was discussed briefly about short-term rentals that have been arranged for a property that might sell, and then the permit for the STR would no longer be valid at the change of ownership. And we were giving consideration to what was shared with us as maybe happens 10 times or something like that. And staff went back and looked at kind of opportunities there, and now we're gonna hear their summary of their findings and make some decisions on this.
Yes, thank you.
Some direction decisions.
Yeah. All right.
Haley, go right ahead.
Thanks for having me. This is Haley Hart, Long Range Planner. I also have Philip online, who I think he's got presenter capabilities now, just in case, but we are going to share a slide deck about our research on the run-out period. So with your permission, I'd like to share that.
Go right ahead.
And show. Excellent. Okay. So, Mayor Tory, as you had mentioned, this topic came up during second reading of Ordinance 9 in June through public comment. The question was asked that council consider a specific circumstance where a property with a short-term rental reservation sells prior to the completion of those reserved dates. And council had decided not to incorporate it at the topic or into the topic of the adoption of the regulations, but did make public commitment to return to the conversation, which is where we're at today. So again, this idea of a run-out period that is that the city ought to involve itself in the sale of a property where there are existing short-term rental bookings, and this would be pursued through a land use code amendment. Council's goal during the moratorium on short-term rental permits was to develop and implement a comprehensive set of regulations. Those regulations include caps, inspections, life safety, a permitting system, and new permit requirements. So this resulted in a comprehensive set of tools to regulate a huge industry in our community. And the concern about a run-out period is a byproduct of those regulations on short-term rentals. So this is a slide that is in response to your question last week to do a high-level analysis to understand better the number of short-term rental permits in our community when we take out affordable housing units. So the GIS team helped me just do, again, a high-level analysis excluding affordable housing units, which resulted in approximately 580 free market residential units. Again, in the MuniRev system, we currently have 1,319 short-term rental permits. Those are, again, from 2021 that we have grandfathered into the new set of regulations. So that is going to be our baseline come October 1st. So that leads us with 26% of all residential non-affordable housing units with a short-term rental.
Hey, Haley.
Yes.
Would it be possible, not on any time schedule, or I don't know how difficult, but would it be possible to find out how many of the remaining free market residential units in the city of Aspen are primary residence, owner occupied, if you will, or something like that?
Would be great to know. Love that.
I can certainly look into it.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Are there any other questions about this statistic?
Where's that deck, and can we hang out there?
Same.
Mayor Tory, this is Philip Sapino, if you'll permit me to jump in. To the second question first, the deck actually isn't in the city limits. I had some reservations about letting them include that photo, but it's so pretty, I let it slide. And then secondarily, the statistic that we've thrown around about a 68% residential vacancy rate, that is the number for free market residential units in the community. So to put it another way, 32% of residential units are classified as occupied
Yeah.
by the U.S. Census Bureau.
Thank you, Philip.
By the US.
Haley, forget that previous request.
But it, like, there's an overlap, right, because of those 26, anyways, that's not important.
Yeah, right, so,
Thanks. Okay.
okay. So again, sort of revisiting some of the short-term rental regulations, we've got 3 permit types. Again, we've got the owner-occupied, the lodge-exempt, and the classic. The classic permit is what the focus of the run-out conversation is, as those are the permits that are subject to caps. The caps are, or the short-term rental classic permits are subject to non-transferability, a wait list, and that 25% reduction in the number of permits in residential zones, which will be achieved through the cap system. And these 3 pillars are perhaps the most important, as they're sort of the cornerstone of the attrition model to reduce the number of permits in those residential zones over time. Limiting the number of short-term rental permits creates scarcity, and the wait list has been created to equitably manage that competition. So there are 4 main methods. Again, we know this for decreasing the short-term rental classic permits. We got your 3 strikes, you're out. If you're not using your permit within a year, 0 tax filings. And again, central to this conversation is non-transferability and wait list. And staff recognizes that through attrition, a supply and demand issue is created with the short-term rental classic permits, which again is sort of the cornerstone to this conversation. So council directed staff to include this language in order to decrease the supply to balance the community's need for the health of the industry, especially in residential zones. So when we're thinking about the run-out topic, please keep that in mind. Short-term rental lodging exempt and owner-occupied permits are not subject to the caps. And again, the short-term rental classic permits that are in the core and in the lodge zone districts are not subject to the cap and the wait list due to their relationship to downtown services. So in discussing this relationship between the details and the new short-term rental regulations, we've got 2 councils for council to consider. Should the city involve itself in the short-term rental bookings and real estate transaction of these units when they sell? And is the permitting system the appropriate approach to solve for that? So to help understand the framing of tonight's question and those 2 questions, we conducted research and asked questions to the Short-Term Rental Technical Advisory Committee, who have been part of the process over the last 8 months. We also reached out to the communities who were part of the short-term rental case study report, who have non-transferability clauses, and we also reached out to third-party industry professionals. So included in your packet, just as a reminder, there are verbatim feedback and responses for this topic from all sides. So we are going to outline the concerns of the industry as they've outlined it to us, and then we'll go over to staff's concern to help inform a deliberation. And before we sort of start this, I just want to say staff recognizes that this is a topic of concern for the industry, and the loss of bookings, can create hardships and financial liability, and we understand that, and that has been framed to us as well. So the main concern from the operators in the community were that, a unit sells prior to the completion of bookings, and the city's non-transferability clause forbids the new owner from renting the unit. And this sort of supports the concern that visitor experience will be diminished if an operator must cancel a booking or must move a booking last minute. And one of the TAC members was especially concerned that in this occurrence, an operator or owner may go ahead and rent with the booking that was already made, therefore operate without a permit, so do it illegally. There are also the financial concerns that were just touched on, as they may be liable to customers if a booking is canceled and may be refunded. And also, they feel that this is a huge concern because in the industry, they only get 30 to 90 days notice of when an owner sells their unit, so they're also on a short timeline to respond. So on the other side, staff concerns. First, a fourth permit would need to be created, and that permit would conflict with the non-transferability clause, the wait list, and the attrition via cap system, so those 3 pillars that were mentioned earlier. A fourth permit, in essence, would skip the wait list, as it would need to be administered immediately upon the sale of a home in order to honor those bookings. This would create longer wait times for the short-term rental classic permit issuance, as those on the wait list would have to wait for a run-out permit to expire to maintain the capped number in residential zone districts. And an immediate and temporary permit undermines the city's commitment to fairness and equity in administering the permits for short-term rental classics.
Got it.
The need to administer an immediate fourth permit for all homes that are sold with a short-term rental classic permit would also divert staff time to the timeliness of the permit process that would need to be issued. There's concern also about the customer service experience, as there's 1,300 other permits and units that need to be processed and overseen. And this would take away from monitoring, permitting, enforcing, all the other regulatory components that were put forth in the regulations. Additionally, other part of regulations, such as the HOA approval form, inspections, and noticing would need to be omitted due to the timeliness that this fourth permit would need to be processed and administered. And we also think that maybe the artificial influence of homes would be increased because the buyer is guaranteeing an economic transaction for the new owner by advertising existing bookings with that associated property. And again, this is something to consider, that, if someone buys a property and they don't want the booking, then it doesn't exactly solve for the problem of having to uphold a booking for a customer in the future. So this is all predicated on the fact that the new owner would actually want the booking in the first place. So given understanding to both sides from short-term rental operators in the community and staff concerns, staff recommends that council does not direct to amend the land use code. We believe that there are market solutions that don't involve the city as party to accommodate these transactions, and that an owner and a buyer may be able to privately determine how to best accommodate future bookings in the case of a property sale. So I'm happy to facilitate, discussion, questions.
Very well done. I appreciate staff's time and energy on this. This is one of those things that it seemed like such a mild conversation at council table, and then you guys just take it and really do all the investigation that you need to. So I really appreciate that. I'll start conversation off where I am I'm supportive of the recommendation to not be pursuing a fourth permit type for the run-out period. So other council members, John?
I also support staff's recommendation and agree with Torre. The memo was thorough, and just the lack of this type of situation even happening is really what triggers me into taking no action. And it just seems to me that it's the seller's choice, whether they want to book something and have it on the books while they're trying to sell the property. So with the rates, the commissions that our realtors are getting and so on, I think that there are professionals out there that are capable of handling these situations when they arise, and the city does not need to get involved in this. Thank you.
Rachel?
Yeah, I'm going to concur with the staff recommendation as well. And I'm really basing it a lot on what other communities are doing or how they've dealt with the problem. Breckenridge seems to be the only one trying to find an accommodation. And, it made me think of other things, but I don't think we want to go there either. But it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't be able to have an STR permit if your house is on the market. If you want to keep it evil, maybe that's a requirement, and that starts to create more of the attrition. You've decided to sell and leave the town, that's fine, but you're not going to create this guest bad experience by trying to rent while you're not while you're on the market. That was the one thought I had, is that should you be able to STR while the property is on the market? The second thought is more that it should perhaps be a required part of your listing with whoever format or platform you're using to list, to say, this house is currently on the market, and should it sell, bookings will be canceled, within 30 days of the sales date. But I think that those would be procedures or guidelines we might want to talk about later, adding to this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, well, I think the decision's been made. But I guess, yeah, for the record, I respectfully disagree with staff and my fellow council members on this one. I think we've made some really important and big changes, and we've upset the apple cart a lot, and for a good reason, that I'm fully supportive of. And I don't know. I find a number of staff's concerns to be legitimate and fair. I see other ones as not real, or at least not an understanding of how the industry is functioning. And I think, I think this is, in the long run, I think this makes sense, right? Once the expectation's been set going forward. But for this one time, it, frankly, wasn't the business's decision that we changed these rules. It wasn't the guest decision. And I hope it doesn't come back to bite us. I hope a slowing real estate market covers our butt on this one. But, it's very likely that there will be significant challenges to guest experience and to businesses that operate here that I just see as totally unnecessary.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Haley. All right, guys, that is our official agenda. We do have updates and board reports. Skippy, however, has a meeting that he was scheduled for 15 minutes ago with Wendy.
Yeah.
So let's do something real quickly, though, because I do need to ask you guys about a Board of Health alternate. Ann Mullins has resigned her position due to other schedule obligations. So the city council needs a Board of Health alternate.
What day of the week do they meet?
We meet 4 times a year, so it's just quarterly. And it is a Thursday at 1 to 3:30. And I want to say it's the second Thursday of a month. I think so.
Okay. And one other question is, I know Ann had been on council, so she had a lot of experience and had been a rep before, but is it our desire to have an alternate who's a council member or a citizen, perhaps?
It is my desire to have a council member.
Okay.
I think there's obligation here that rises to that level of accountability, and how you represent, I think, should be somebody who sits at the council table that also works with this council. So I think it should be somebody that is a council member.
I'll take it on.
You got it, Chance?
Yeah, the boards that I'm on.
Don't meet on Thursdays?
They don't even meet. CoA's been postponed for a week. Nordic Council's spotty in the summer.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very good.
all right.
Appreciate it.
Fully
Jim.
supportive.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
cool. Run down and do it.
If you want to do that,
Yeah.
you sure
I
can.
don't want to leave her hanging for too long.
Do you want to just give a brief, do you want to tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about it?
Well,
John can do my Nordic and.
the River District
Yeah.
thing? Yeah, okay. I attended the Colorado River District's annual meeting that they have once a year in September in Grand Junction. And I will say it was one of the best attended I've ever seen, because the crisis is reaching that sort of boiling point. They had a number of leaders and people speaking about the issue who are from the lower basin as well as the upper basin. And they had a very nice panel with Native Americans who are now finally going to have a seat at the table with the Colorado River issues. I think the main point to bear in mind is that the river was flowing at about 16 million acre feet a year during the period before, when they divvied it up. And then now they're coming to a realization that we probably have maybe a 9 million acre feet river in total, and how do you manage a river like that? And one person asked the question at the end of a lot of panel discussion, all right, so you guys are the upper and lower basin leaders, what's the plan for managing a 9 million acre feet river? And everybody just looked at each other and nobody had an answer. There are no answers. California is currently taking 10 million acre feet from reservoir as it is now. So, there's some really severe cutbacks happening. There was a lot of talk about how would it be administered, and, Colorado is pretty much assisting on the law of the river, first in line, first in time, prior appropriation. But, if you start getting the calls going up the river, the whole Fry-Arc project is junior to a lot of other rights. So there's a lot of challenge. The other item that really is kind of driven home is there's continuing water projects and takes going forward from the Colorado Basin, to develop our allocation or our share. That's of concern. As I spoke last week about the endangered fish on the 15-mile reach of the river, that is imperiled, and the water seemed to me to be a big patchwork. Sometimes they can pull some from Green Mountain Reservoir, some fish water from Root Eye. They hope the operators let a little extra go, but that reach is far below what it should be for summer flows, and so much so that the fish ladder doesn't work most of the summer for sorting out the endangered and non-endangered fish. The whole goal was to create a really great passage and length of territory for those fish from basically the DeBeck Canyon up to Rifle. Would be prime habitat for them, and that's why they're trying to keep all the invasives out. We're all worried it's going to end up in court or it's going to end up as a federalized system, and that's been the impetus to get regional folks involved. The biggest concern, I think, and as I mentioned, Tyler's going to be putting in some comments for us, but is that they're just going to keep paying to fallow farms on the West Slope, start to say that alfalfa is not an important crop, things like that. Of course, alfalfa feeds beef, but as well as horses. But will the Front Range reduce their diversions by the amount that these guys are fallowing? Who knows? One of the bigger things that Andy Mueller, the director of the River District, and others agreed to start talking about is what is called the transit cost of the water, and that's the evaporation of going from Root Eye down to Powell, or how long it sits in Powell before it's released. And for some reason, they have not been counting transit costs out of the lower basin's deliveries, and they think that's a good 1.2 million acre feet, and that should be squared up first. But it really just, everyone's in the bullseye anymore.
Supposedly, they were going to study the Flaming Gorge release this year and see how much was lost in transit.
Yeah, there's that, and then, the evaporation and those sort of things are just really adding up more and more, is the only way to say it. But we're very hopeful to see people come to some new revolutions about this. Attending water meetings over the past 2 decades and speaking with the directors of Northern Water, these guys, and saying, hey, you can tell these municipalities you deliver to that you don't have to get a 1/4 acre of bluegrass with your lawn. Maybe you limit how much can be outside irrigation, how much greenery you can have. And they're always, oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. Now they're all like, we can do that and we have to do that. So you're seeing a lot more cooperation than ever before. But I have no answers of where we're going to go.
Okay.
No, just the fact that we're looking at evaporation rates between reservoirs is details that we never had to care about before.
Well, there's also been some studies about the climate change impacts of reservoirs.
Yeah.
And when they get too warm with the algae forming and things like this, they can be very toxic, and not necessarily swimmable or anything like that. So we're just, we're facing a new future. And it's going to be, when we did the Canary Initiative back when Worcester was on council, the early studies said that, we would start having temperatures like Glenwood Springs, and Glenwood Springs would have temperatures like Grand Junction, and Grand Junction would one day be like Phoenix. And those days are coming a lot faster than that study predicted.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you. I did not make the APSHA meeting last week. Skippy was there for me, so we'll have to do that report later.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I have no board reports. I gave the Nordic Council one last week. Our core meeting got postponed until this week, so looking forward to my first Board of Health meeting.
Right on. All right, thanks, guys. Hey, thank you to GrassRoots. We are going to conclude our work session for this evening. Have a wonderful week. We do not have a scheduled meeting tomorrow. We were supposed to meet with a BOCC as a joint meeting, as we do a couple times a year, but there are a couple of players that are out of town, so we are going to postpone that till our next meeting. Thank you again, GrassRoots. Have a wonderful week.
Yeah, Francine,